Yeah, so this is the 4R Nutrient Certification Program. It's Ohio's voluntary approach, we hope. You don't need to see that. There we go. So that's just the website will be on the last slide. Sorry. So let's get going. So everybody's familiar with the 4Rs. It's been around a long time, developed by the fertilizer industry years ago. It's applying nutrients at the right rate, using the right source, at the right time, at the right place. And obviously it has environmental and economic and social implications. Okay. March 2014, before the Toledo water crisis, thank goodness, the agriculture community comes together and actually established the 4R Nutrient Stewardship Certification Program for the Western Lake Erie Basin. So this started in the Western Lake Erie Basin. It is a voluntary, third-party auditor verified program. So, and all you auditors, raise your hands so we can all see you. Sure. Raise them high. This is a group of third-party auditors who actually do the audits of the, and we'll talk about who it's for, basically fertilizer dealers and crop consultants. But it's voluntary and it's third-party auditor. This is not a self-auditing program, and to me that lends a lot of credibility and strength to the program. It is the goal is for it to be consistent, science-based, easier said than done, but you know, we do our best. A recognized standard for ag retailers, consultants, and other certified professionals. So this is not an on-farm program. Ohio Department of Agriculture is in a pilot program now for farmers, but this is for basically fertilizer dealers and crop consultants, because we know from research and just from experience, these are big influencers in farmers' nutrient management decisions. So that's who it's targeted for. And obviously the goal is the implementation and documentation of the 4Rs. Anytime you have questions, I won't wait till last. You'll have to speak up because I may not see you. But just yell. Yell loud because I'm old and deaf. The program structure and governance is governed by the Nutrient Stewardship Council. That includes Agribusiness, including one active grower, one farmer, government and environmental NGOs. Nature Conservancy in particular has been a huge help. Universities and researchers. And we'll talk about it more later, but there is no government money. This is not a government program. This is an industry-driven program. Okay. So I won't go over everybody, but there's a very robust advisory committee, very broad-based, a lot of partners, so we get a lot of input, I think with some good results. As of January 1st, 2017, the certification went statewide, so now I get to travel all the state of Ohio now, visiting folks. But it is now open to all folks in the state of Ohio. And we did add 4 additional nitrogen-related requirements to reflect. Most of Ohio outside the WLAB goes south to the Gulf, and there, of course, as previous speakers referenced, the primary concern are nitrates, not so much phosphorus. Okay. So where are we? How have we done so far? And that's probably, we might be at 47 or 48, but I'm going to say 48 certified branch facilities. 37 to 38 of those are in the Western Lake Erie Basin. A total of 2.77 million acres are now under 4R certification. That's the acres covered by the various crop consultants and fertilizer dealers that are currently certified. And in the Western Lake Erie Basin, about 1.9 million. That's getting closer to 2 now. And that's about 40% of the basin. And so we're very happy with that. We hope in 2 or 3 years to be at 2/3 to 3/4 in the basin. So, so far so good. The folks in the Western Lake Erie Basin are very motivated. It's been a good group to work with. So why would nutrient service providers, that's the term that we use for fertilizer dealers and crop consultants, why would they want to participate in the program? to document and demonstrate to their customers and community that they are committed to 4R stewardship principles. So there's some public relations in this. Maximize crop uptake of nutrients and minimize nutrient loss. Create long-term positive impacts on water bodies associated with ag production areas. Document compliance with existing regulations. It positions the facility or crop consultant as a leader in water quality efforts. And we'll talk in a minute, but these audits are rigorous. They really are. And the nutrient service provider gets to pay for the privilege of being audited. So sometimes that's kind of a tough sell, but it's self-funding. There's no government money. There's no money flowing from anybody else. The goal is that this is all self-funded, so they literally pay to be audited. How many industries do you know do that on a voluntary basis? I think it's pretty unique. Big kudos to the fertilizer industry. And at a certain level, it's the right thing to do. So what do? So I try and persuade people to sign up. That's a big part of my job. And then once they do sign up, I'm basically the coach. I go out and I do a pre-audit visit. I prep them for the audit, getting them ready for it. So I'll go over the requirements one by one. There are 45 of them. We'll see that later. And I do this at the applicant's facility. We try to have key staff there who make nutrient management recommendations. And it takes about 2 hours, sometimes longer if they have a lot of questions or if they really have some problems. Generally, it's a documentation thing. It's a documentation thing. So we provide, and that's free of charge to them. So that's something we do for them. Okay, so what does the audit cycle look like? It's a 3-year audit cycle. Now it goes beyond 3 years. Every year they want to be certified. They have to have an audit every year. It's not a one and done. But the 45 requirements are phased in over 3 years. So in year 1, there are 28 requirements, and it's cumulative. Year 2, we add 11 to those 28, 39. Year 3, 6 more, 45. Okay. Year 3, they can have if they so choose, they can have a remote audit where the auditor doesn't have to come to the facility. Records can be transmitted electronically if they've done well in year 1 and year 2. And we do have some. We have some year 4 audits coming up now. That's how that works. The audit requirement areas, and I do have, if you want it, be a lot of handouts, but I do have a copy of the requirements. If you're interested, you just get a hold of me afterwards. I'll give you one. And also on our website, all these materials show up. It's 4rcertified.org. And that'll be on the last slide. But the audit requirement areas are basically training and education. We'll go over each one. Nutrient recommendation and application, and monitoring of 4R implementation. So in each of these areas, there has to be documentation. There has to be proof. The nutrient service provider just can't say, yeah, we do that. There has to be proof, like any audit. That's what the 45, the document that contains the 45 standards, that's what that looks like. And again, if you want a copy, you're free. I'd be more than happy to give you one. So training and education. Certified professionals, basically CCAs, must have 5 CEUs of nutrient management every 2 years. If you're a CCA, you have that. Basically what that's saying is that there has to be a CCA on staff to review and approve the recommendations. Number 2, sales and application staff, so what that means is non-CCAs, have to have 2 hours training every 2 years in 4R management. Number 4, provide 4R materials for all customers. So there is a grower education component that we're asking these fertilizer dealers and crop consultants to do. So they have to, one way or another, they have to provide 4R materials for all their customers each year. And then they also have to sponsor a training for growers and customers. And usually, they'll have summer field days, winter meetings, but in that, somewhere, there has to be at least a half hour of something that relates to 4Rs. So there's a definite grower education, farmer education component to this thing. And that, I think, is where a lot of the change will come. They also must document, and we have tools for them to document this, but they must discuss with growers on an ongoing basis phosphorus runoff and leaching management, not just rates, but phosphorus runoff and leaching management, nitrogen management options to reduce loss, and also the location and management of sensitive areas. That would be environmentally sensitive areas, tile inlets, wellheads, gullies, waterways, areas of concentrated flow that maybe need a waterway, don't have one, those kinds of areas. Because we all know that where nutrients leave fields, they don't leave them evenly across the field. There are very defined areas where those nutrients tend to leave. Number 6, facilities are encouraged but not required to discuss the benefits of cover crops, drainage, water control structures, filler strips, etc., conservation measures. Okay. The nutrient recommendations. So they have to, on 100% of the acres, they have to have soil tests for no older than 4 years old, so 4-year cycle soil tests. With VRT, that's not a big deal. That's generally on a 3-year cycle for whole field samples. Sometimes that takes a while to get up to speed, and we give them a little time to get up to speed, but they are expected to get there. Nutrient recommendations must be provided by a certified professional, basically a CCA, and they must comply with Tri-State Fertilizer Guide. Regardless of their opinions of Tri-State, they have to comply with Tri-State. Okay? Number 3, they must utilize crop history and yield goals. That's a normal practice. Number 4, the new nitrogen requirements. I won't go through all of them, but the big one is a 50 pound per acre limit on fall applications for spring planted crops. So that eliminates fall anhydrous. There isn't much of that going on in Ohio. Some still, but not much. You go further west in Illinois, and there's still a lot of it, Iowa. Number 5, identify. We kind of talked about this before, but not only do they have to identify environmentally sensitive areas, but they have to get them on field maps. They have to know where they are. There's no requirement for a setback, but they have to know where they are. And again, that's primarily an education issue. So it's a fair amount of work. Also, and I didn't put it on the list, if there's manure applied, they have to demonstrate to the auditor that they have credited those manure nutrients or sludge or whatever the non-fertilizer nutrient source is, that they have credited those in their recommendations. And in high livestock areas, that can be a challenge, but that is one of the requirements. Again, further nutrient application, annual calibration equipment has to be documented, and then the application has to be consistent with the recommendation. Those you can't apply more than what was recommended. So that's that area. Oh, I'm sorry, we got some more. No application to frozen or snow-covered soil. That, of course, is law in the Western Lake Erie Basin, but outside the basin, that's a change for them, for some of them. By year 4, no surface, or by year 3, no surface application without immediate incorporation. If the NOAA forecast exceeds a 50% chance of 1 inch or more of rain in the next 12 hours. Again, that's law in the Western Lake Erie Basin, but that's a change for folks outside. And finally, by year 3, utilize GIS and VRT on 35% of custom applied acres. Okay, so that's those. Monitoring and implementation. Number of customers and acres participating. They have to track and submit that. Records documenting recommended rates and application, that's part of the audit. And records that growers support for nutrient stewardship. So how does this work? The auditor or the nutrient service provider provides the auditor a list of grower customers and number of acres in 3 categories. Full service, where they do both application and recommendation only, application only. And the auditor randomly selects, whatever, one every 7th or every 10th or every 15th file. And they go through those files very closely. So they'll select a grower. And by the way, everybody signs confidentiality agreements, and they are rigorous. I've signed a few over the years, and these are the most rigorous I've ever seen. everything is confidential. We no longer have our contracts if we violate that. But they will take these files and they'll start selecting fields and soil tests. And is the soil test current? Is it actually used for the recommendation? Does the recommendation follow tri-state? And they'll carry that all the way through to application. And so there needs to be the ability to track that from from application back or from soil test to application. And they'll try and select some high testing fields, some low testing fields, some manure fields, fields that have received manure. Again, it is rigorous and it is thorough. And I won't read all that to you because nobody documents routinely all the conversations they have with farmers. Why would you? There is often the first year is a lot of non-complies, and sometimes there's some soil tests that are missing. And so there is the opportunity to have a corrective action plan. And basically what that says, the Nutrient Stewardship Council reviews, and there's however many non-complies, and so they certify them. But the NSP has to write down and submit what it is we're going to do about these non-complies. Who's responsible for it? At what percentage level will we, how much are we going to bring it up from year 1 to year 2 or year 2 to year 3, and by when? So that's the mechanism that we work with everybody, and so that's how that works. And I try to help them with that also. So lessons learned. We learned quite a bit. We're still learning because this thing was new. It really is. The credibility of agriculture is vital. You all know that. We have to be authentic. No smoke and mirrors. It's wrong and it doesn't work. We have to be authentic. In my opinion, this is an authentic program. It showcases the value and credibility of a science-based approach. Again, that's easier said than done, but that needs to be the goal. We've got to have the ability to empathize and work in non-ag circles. Don't wait for a crisis, which, this was up and running before the Toledo water crisis, but you never want to wait for a crisis. The aggressive voluntary approach may not stave off additional regulation for agriculture, but it gives us a respected place at the table. Some of you remember in the Western Lake Erie Basin, some of the first proposals to hit the legislature were to ban phosphorus fertilizer for a year or two. That shows you the kind, and it wouldn't have made any difference in Lake Erie. So that just, we have to have a credible place at the table. Direct funding by nutrient service providers, in other words, them paying for their own audits, has been accepted. It's a little tougher sell outside of the basin, but we'll get there. Removal from government funding and oversight is popular among nutrient service providers. In other words, my being able to say this is not a government program helps. It does. And there is no substitute for, and I'm not trying to keep my job, but there's no substitute for boots on the ground. It takes people face-to-face time to make programs work. You just can't throw money at things. Looking to the future, where are we headed? There is a meeting coming up in Detroit next week. There are 2 or 3 Canadian provinces, 7 or 8 other states really interested in this kind of a program or something similar. So the word is getting out. We're being watched pretty closely. ODA has a pilot on-farm for our certification program. So as I said before, this is not an on-farm program, but they are piloting an on-farm for our certification program. I think Ed Crawford has been instrumental in developing that. We are beginning to get groups of dealers together, and I've kind of handpicked them, folks that like to think outside of the box. We haven't met yet, but our goal is to identify the kinds of innovative practices and technologies we need to improve water quality and enhance profitability. So we already have this happening. There is some of our dealers are starting to soil sample as separate zones, end rows, for instance. The areas around tile inlets, and often these areas are in fact higher in nutrients, and so they're putting them in their VRT maps as no-apply zones or less fertilizer. We need somebody to develop high-capacity equipment to inject dry fertilizer. Yeah, we have equipment to inject dry fertilizer, but it's slow, it's expensive. It cannot match the capacity of a 90-foot spread surface applicator running at 15 mile an hour. We've got nothing. There's no reason why that can't be developed. I'm not an ag engineer, but that's an example of something we need. Looking at soil amendments that capture soluble P, gypsum, iron oxide, whatever. Perhaps we're looking at fertilizer or retailer industry cost share of edge-of-field treatment technologies. Drainage water control structures, nitrate or soluble P treatment structures, blind inlets, et cetera, et cetera. Improvement of nitrogen prediction models. There's a lot of N prediction models out there. I'm not sure how good they are, but that's the future for nitrogen. And also, we need the development of slower release phosphorus fertilizers. We have slow release urea, ESN, but we need some other stuff for phosphorus. So just some ideas. So let's focus, even though this is not an on-farm certification program, I like to get it back to the farm, because what's done on the farm is what's going to make a difference in Lake Erie. I mean, and Gulf of Mexico. This is my list. This is not an official list from OABA or the Nutrient Stewardship Council. This is my own semi-ignorant list. So, drainage water control structures. So I have chosen those practices that are proven. They're, in my opinion, more likely than other things to be accepted and used by farmers with or without cost share, and practical. So that's been my criteria. So these are just my favorites, is all I'm saying. Drainage water control structures. That's a flatland practice. You can use them in more rolling ground, but it gets very expensive because you got to have every, whatever it is, there's a relationship to slope. But basically, it's a flatland practice. But they will, and that 25% is low, but they'll reduce closer to 40-50% reduction in nitrate and soluble P loss. Delivery. It's just, there's lots of research. It's a fact. One-time installation and cost, and does not require a change in farming practices. The only thing you got to do is to raise the water table up to usually within a foot of the surface. Some people don't like it that close, but raise the water table. We're not flooding the fields. We're not shutting off drainage. We're not blocking drainage. Just raising the water table after fall field operations, and lower it 2 to 3 weeks before planting. It ain't rocket science. You got to remember to do it, but it's not rocket science. 25 years of research and experience. When they first started messing with these in Defiance County, my farmer thought was we're going to have sedimentation like crazy in the tile lines, and it hasn't happened. Hadn't happened. Very effective practice. Very effective. Next one, cover crops. And that was covered. Lots and lots of research. Very effective in reducing nitrate loss. Depends on the year, as it was talked about. Depends on the crop, et cetera, but everybody accepts that they're effective in reducing nitrate loss. I was really glad to see the work in Indiana on reduction of soluble P. There's not much work on whether cover crops reduce soluble P. Total P, yes, because they reduce sedimentation, erosion. So that was very interesting. Still a little bit of a question mark, but that was encouraging work in Indiana. Reduction of runoff and erosion and sediment-bound P. Sediment-bound P still matters. Drive around Northwest Ohio and see how many fields are tilled down to nothing last fall. There's a lot of runoff. They increase infiltration rates. They increase water holding capacity. If used continuously and without tillage, they'll increase organic matter slowly, and they jumpstart the biologic activity, especially with manure. And yes, manure can be part of a healthy and environmentally sustainable system. Further tillage reductions, eliminate fall secondary tillage after primary tillage. And I'm a big no-till guy, a big cover crop guy, but in the real world it's going to take a while. So you got a lot of folks doing fall primary tillage, but there is no excuse, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, for working that ground in the fall down to a powder. There's just no excuse for it. Experiment with modern advances in no-till corn production, including easier to manage cover crops. We know so much more. When we first started no-tilling in '78, we knew nothing. We made so many mistakes, it wasn't funny. But we know a lot more. We are so much better at it and funny. Number 3, there is no reason not to go to no-till beans. Lots of research. They may be a little shorter, they may have this and that and the other, but they'll yield the same. So there's no reason for primary tillage of corn stalks. And finally, be careful with the vertical tillage. If you're not careful, you're creating a new shallow compacted layer, and that increases runoff, reduces infiltration. Finally, field by field analysis of nutrient loss pathways. So with the 4 R's, we do field by field, nutrient recommendations. We look at that field. What does that field need in nutrients? But we need to start looking at individual fields to see how nutrients are leaving and what can we do about it. So areas of concentrated surface flow, which lead to ditches, streams, catch basins, etc. Driving across the landscape, you'll see a lot of cases where 30, 40, 50 acres will come down to one swale to a catch basin and a road ditch and even if it's not a gully, that's where the water goes, and that's where you're getting not only sediment-bound nutrients but soluble nutrients. And then obviously through tile inlets, so that we can soil sample those areas separately. We can replace them with blind inlets where you eliminate for lack of a better term, the Hickenbottom, the tile inlet, and you have underneath a larger area, in that low area, you have stone or gravel, or you could have something like slag, iron oxide. But there's lots of opportunities, and the water will get away just the same. Putnam County, I think, is installing several blind inlets, if I'm not mistaken. Finally, get phosphorus fertilizer and manure in the ground. We have got to get back to starter fertilizers, even if it's only 10 gallon of 1034O. That's 34 pounds, more or less half of a corn crop's use, more or less, below the surface. And I know that it speeds things up when you don't have to deal with starter fertilizer, but frankly at 10 gallons to the acre, it doesn't slow you down that much. Injection, if feasible, we talked about that. If you're doing tillage anyhow, so I would see tillage as the transition to no-till and cover crops. But if you're doing it anyhow, incorporate that surface application before the next rain. That first rain, heavy rainfall on surface applied phosphorus, whether it's manure or commercial fertilizer, is responsible for a lot of the soluble phosphorus movement. And we know that just getting it either underneath the ground or incorporated will reduce it by about 90%. It's a big deal. And again, there's lots of work on that. It's not recent work. And also, in-crop applications. If you're already in the agronomic range with P and K, it doesn't matter what time of year you put it on. So if the weather has calmed down and the corn's this big, you can broadcast that fertilizer then. Hopefully, the worst of the heavy event systems are over, although anymore you don't know. And finally, be mindful of the weather forecast. We talked about that. So that's it. Any questions? Yeah?
As your 4R dealers are talking to their growers and educating their growers, do they need to be CCAs at that dealership or talking to the growers?
That's a good question. No, we only require that there be a CCA on staff who can review all the nutrient recommendations and sign off on them. So that's why we have I'll grant you it's not a lot, but the requirement that all sales and application staff have both an initial training, then every 2 years, 2 hours of ongoing training. I tell you what I find is a lot of sales folks are at the CCA level in terms of their knowledge. They just haven't bothered to become a CCA. That's what I find. I mean, that's my experience. That's all I can speak for. Yeah.
Are your auditors CCA certified, or what type of background do they have?
These are all ag people. We have retired extension agents, folks coming out of environmental areas, crop consultants, and many of them are CCAs. Yeah, and we train them. It's a rigorous training, 2-day training, and then we meet 3 or 4 times a year in a roundtable discussion to try and get everybody on the same page and help. Each of the auditors has different strengths and weaknesses, and trying to bring everybody up to speed. But it's a good group of people. They're pros. But we do say you got to know ag. They have to have some sort of ag background or knowledge. Okay, thank you.